I think crypto has upside. I'm still in the case here where my midterm outlook is still down, but my near-term outlook is to the upside. I think we take out the short-term highs of 22, and I think you're probably headed back to at least 25.5 here. And that's assuming the dollar really has topped and starts to come in over the next couple weeks. No, I think the markets already kind of have the game plan here. And I think that's the amazing thing that most investors have to understand is that, by the time that CPI came out this morning, the markets, the algorithms reacted and the small investors reacted. But smart money was just buying hand over fist because they were already saying, okay, that number's over. Now we're looking to next month, right? And I think the same thing with the Federal Reserve is the markets are already seeing the odds, right? So high percentage of 75, lower percentage of 100. The markets are already saying, okay, well, if they do 100, maybe that's good news because they're going to then go on hold maybe all the way till after the midterms. And then who knows, maybe the economy, maybe inflation is so much lower, then they don't feel like they have to continue to raise so aggressively. And so I think that's the way the market looks at it. And I think we could actually be up for a little bit of a summer rally now, even if the Fed hikes 75 basis points or 100 basis points. I could see that. I agree with that. I mean, I think crypto is a case in point. There are so many freaky similarities with the crypto bubble and the dot-coms that it's you can't even deny it. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, think about how much insanity was in the dot-com era, and then look at what's happened with the Wall Street bets and the GameStops and the AMCs and Robinhoods and crypto. I mean, it is so similar. And the scary thing is, if that ends up happening, what does Bitcoin end up going to at that point? Because you'd have to assume it would go down further for sure. Who knows? I'm sure there's plenty of big money out there that's lurking. I mean, I'm not the only one. You're not the only one that's paying attention to Bitcoin here, and people with a lot bigger, a lot more money, I'm sure are. Yeah, I mean, in the very least, I think just poetically, we have to go back and test the pre-COVID high here, So I think to me, that's the no-brainer level. Whether or not we get below that is probably all about how, do we go into a recession or not? And then how bad is it? But I think, just think about this. I mean, think about all the money that was pumped into the system that got us this move and how vertical it was compared to the long-term trend. And then it just makes a whole lot of sense with the Fed, pulling all that out, that at least we would go back to this point right here. It's tough to know. It's looking at the commodity prices and trying to gauge when they started to fall and then how long does it take to pass through to the consumer. So I guess I would say I'm not super surprised, but I do think that this is the top on CPI readings. And I do think that by next month, you're going to have this full month plus of oil falling, copper falling. I mean, all these other commodities just collapsing pretty dramatically. And that probably starts to show at least next month a slight downtick. Tick for tick. And again, a lot of people were getting, so number one, we've been down into this 2017 high, right? I mean, we've been below it a little bit. We've been above it a little bit. As of yesterday, we were below. Now we're back above today. And here's that line right there. But I think people were not, most crypto investors, all they do is focus on crypto. And again, I think that's my stock background has been very good for kind of seeing the bigger macro picture. And you have to understand that if the dollar wasn't surging, I think crypto would be much, much higher than it is right now. And if the dollar is topping, and you can already see the reversal in crypto as the dollar's fallen today, so let's say the price gets driven down to 12,000 or 10,000 on Bitcoin, which I don't know where Michael Saylor's margin calls come in. I know he has leveraged out a little bit, but that would be the other thing that would be really scary. Like if we started to break, let's say the 17.5 low, where is his point where MicroStrategy has some issues there? I don't know. I don't remember. Initially, I heard it was around 21,000, and then I think he kind of updated it and said it was lower than that. But that would just be something else to kind of keep in mind is that when you have an illiquid asset like Bitcoin, if any of these, did you hear about Mt. Gox, right? So apparently they have 150,000 Bitcoin that might get unloaded. Now, market doesn't care about that right now. But if we were to get another leg down, do these margin calls, bankruptcies, all these factors start to kind of trickle through? So I could almost be on your page where maybe this is a bottom if we don't go at all any lower. That would trigger more bankruptcies, which would be more liquidations and those. But if we do take out 17.5, that's where I would get real nervous, minimum going down to 12,000, maybe even sub 10. I'd be curious to just see, like, if Bitcoin ever did get down sub 10, do people really start going after him in terms of his, questioning his ability to lead? Granted, I think he's the biggest shareholder by far of MicroStrategy. But yeah, I mean, it does warrant there's just so many kind of unknowns because whales own so much of Bitcoin that it does, it just makes you wonder what the heck could happen. So when we were at 19 a couple weeks ago, I did pick up a little bit of a kind of a longer term hold, but it was only 1/6 of what I plan to accumulate. So basically kind of dipping the toe in the water and saying, okay, this is what I'm willing to allocate of my net worth. Then if we go lower, I can kind of average dollar cost average in, knowing that my long-term view is super, super bullish on Bitcoin. It's definitely a possibility. I would still handicap it as the least likely scenario for me. Just like always, I'm always fully aware that anything can happen, right? I mean, we could go lower, we could go straight up, but ultimately, there's still too much junk in the system, and we've seen bankruptcies, we've seen Terra Luna kind of collapse and all these other things. But I don't think, I mean, for me, I still look at how many cryptocurrencies are out there. That's still problematic to me. Like, how the heck can there still be over 10,000 or 15 or 20,000 cryptocurrencies? Where does the washout finally occur? And so it would be hard for me to imagine that we're really done here, especially because of this, right? So think about this. Previous cycles have always had the Fed helping by printing. This is the first cycle we don't. So the logic would dictate this would be the worst of all the cycles versus the best of all of them. Now, granted, you do have more adoption, so I think you have to factor that in. Maybe if regulation came out, I think that could be a possible major positive as well. But I'm still in the camp. I got to think that we're headed lower after we get some sort of uptick here. What was this? I mean, if the dollar tops, you at least got to get a near-term rally. Again, the question is later on. My biggest fear, I think, is that if the economy slips into recession, right, and you have a scenario where risk assets take another hit because of that. So let's say earnings start to really suffer, maybe people start to fret about it's going to be worse than a recession, but maybe like a Great Depression or even a Great Recession like we had in 08, 09. Does that deleveraging then even take Bitcoin down with it like it has now over the past, year? And I think that's part of the great thing about investing, right? You have people on both sides, and that's what makes a market. So all we can do is make the best judgment and the kind of the chart. I use the charts myself, and it seems to give me a nice little edge, and that's all we can do. Take a look at the NASDAQ here. Great recovery on the NASDAQ today, man. I tell you, there was this upsloping trend line. We opened below it, but they rescued it. We're right now, we're only up 70 cents on the Qs, but considering that print on CPI, that's a nice recovery for sure. So the tech stocks are showing some signs of life. I think the dollar weakening, if that continues, is a positive for the overall market. And I think, really just keep an eye. I'll tell you one thing. There's one chart I've been watching more than anything, more than Bitcoin, more than S&P, more than the NASDAQ, and it's this chart right here. I mean, this is really the key chart, the dollar.